All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is John Donadio. I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey Association of Counties, and I want to welcome you to our last, I guess, this year in a series of free virtual workshops. We're going to have them again next year, so don't worry. And this one is on the reauthorization of the Transportation Trust Fund with the 8-year capital program set to expire in June of 2024. We're going to hear what that means, what actions we may need to take, and with respect to county government and the association, over the next few months, you're going to hear about the importance of local aid allocations, how they mitigate the reliance on local property taxes, and more importantly, ensure a safe and reliable network of county local roads and bridges, which carry 55% of the state's overall traffic. So before we get started, I want to turn it over to our president, Camden County Commissioner Jonathan Young, for a few words. So, Commissioner, Mr.
Thank you,
President,
John.
floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Director. First, welcome. I'd like to welcome everybody. We've had some really good webinars this year. And this is one that is very important to us as well, because as John said, counties make up 55% of the roadways and bridges that carry our constituents across the state of New Jersey. So, we want to be more of a proactive stance here as we take this. That's why we're kind of starting a little far out, but we want to make sure we get the ball rolling early and let people know that how important this is to county government, that this transportation fund gets refunded and allocations keep rolling into the counties. So with that said, I don't want to hold anybody up for respect of time. And we will let the ladies take it away, and we'll have a good webinar for our last one, Johnny. Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you, Mr. President. And before we turn it over to Zoe and Kathleen, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, put them in the Q&A. We will use the chat box to communicate with each other if we need to. I think, Zoe, can we make this presentation available? I hate to put you on the spot, but I am after the fact. If not, it's no worries. We'll have the recording available as well. So if you have any, if you'd like to see that after the fact, we'll make sure to email it to you and have it on our website as long as Zoe's okay with it, which I think she certainly is. And I, of course, want to thank Angela Wolf for doing a great job as always and alleviating just so much stress from my life. So thank you, Angela. I appreciate it a great deal. I never would have gotten anybody even in to see this workshop. So with that, I'm very pleased to have two really critical voices, especially the last time around that the Transportation Trust Fund was reauthorized. I mean, I can't believe this was 8 years ago. It seems like it was just yesterday. And Zoe and Kathleen, you look exactly the same. I think I might have had hair back in 8 years or so ago. I don't know. But again, really two vital voices last time, this time around. First, we have Zoe Baldwin, who is the New Jersey director for the Regional Plan Association. She's also a commissioner for the South Jersey Transportation Authority and previously served as the director of government affairs for the Utility Contractors Association. Again, a strong advocate for reauthorizing the Transportation Trust Fund last time around. And I imagine, and I know this time around as well. And then we have Mercer County Commissioner Kathleen Lewis, who has also been a council person in Lawrence Township for more than a decade, right? And served as mayor in, I think, 2012 to 2014. And last time around, when the Transportation Trust Fund was authorized, you were the Director of Government Relations and Public Affairs for AAA, the New Jersey Automobile Club. So thank you both for being here. I appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedules to do this, and we'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen here. All right. There we go. There we go. Apologies. So, good morning. Thank you so much for having us here. This is such an important conversation going forward. As John mentioned, our transportation capital funding serves so many purposes beyond just fixing our roads, right? That's like a really reductive way to think about it, that we need money for roads. And so we're here to talk a little bit about what we need to be thinking about, how we need to be thinking about it, and just to kind of kick it off and start with like a little bit of an explainer. And so again, my name is Zoe Baldwin. I'm the New Jersey director for the Regional Plan Association, and we're the nation's oldest research planning and advocacy organization. And basically, we work to make sure that the New Jersey's built environment works for the people and businesses that rely on it every day. That's kind of the shorthand. And we've been doing this for 100 years, and we work in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. So just really looking at this from a broader and regional perspective. And so I spent the better part of 2 decades working on this at the federal and state levels, because Jack Latier, our former DOT commissioner, had a really good quote, and it's, "Transportation is the game board upon which all other games are played." It's critical to our state, and we need to make sure that we are not only being financially responsible, but that we're being responsible and culpable to, again, the people that use this every day and the businesses that rely on it every day. And so this is an issue that is personal and near and dear to me, and I've been working on it for many years. And I'm actually joined today by my longtime partner in crime on this, Kathleen Lewis. So I'll turn it over to her.
Thanks so much, Zoe. You know, it's true. This is one of the most critical issues. And when I worked for AAA, I talked about roadway safety. I talked about all of these pieces. I looked at it from a local elected's lens, because I was on council at the time. Now I'm here on a county level, and it's even more important as we sort of start to have this conversation. And I know the president just talked about how we're starting this conversation early. It is, quite frankly, never too early to start this conversation. And I think that one of the really important parts is about how we have this conversation and how we talk about this, because so often I see people's eyes glaze over when we talk about TTF. It's funding, it's bonding, it's boring. It's the minutia of government that people think doesn't matter. And quite frankly, it is one of the most important things that we as elected officials and we as government can do. Every single person on this call, I will guarantee you, if you're an elected official or if you serve or if you work for an elected official, one of the things that they get asked about all the time is their roadways. When are you going to fix that pothole? When is that traffic light going to get fixed? It is a fundamental piece of our government. But even more than that, how we deal with our transportation says so much about our values as government. And if you want to talk about all of our values, all of the things that we care about, and when you want to talk to people about the TTF, it's not just about funding our roads because they need to be safe. They absolutely do. And that is near and dear to my heart. But if you think about the things that we care about, and I think about them as sort of the 3 E's, right? So first off, equity. If we want to talk about how we make equitable government, making sure that we have ways for our residents to access transportation so they can get to work, to school, to vital services, that is about equity. If we only have roads that work for our cars and don't work for transportation, we have failed our residents, and we need to make sure we are fixing that. It's about the economy. If we want to see our local businesses thrive, then we need to make sure that it is easy to get to them. Whether that means we invest in walkable downtowns, whether it means that we are making sure that our roads make it easy to get there as opposed to the big mall down the street, or maybe it is getting to the big mall because that is your economic driver. We need to make sure that our roadways work to make our economy work. And if it's the environment, our transportation values are so much about the environment. Do we make for healthier communities by providing opportunities for biking and walking? Do we have transit options so that we don't have to have as many emissions? Are we investing in fleets that will reduce emissions? All of those pieces go into the TTF. And so the TTF is not just about how do we fund fixing our roads. It is about all of the values that we as elected officials run on and how we tell people we're going to invest in our community. And I will say one last thing, because John mentioned it, and it made me think about the first reauthorization. He talked about how investment in TTF reduces reliance on property taxes. And it's a huge piece of this that we often don't talk about, but our residents care a lot about. Our residents care about how much we are increasing their taxes, and making sure that we have funding so that we don't have to rely on property taxes for this is important. So all of those things that we talk about are all wrapped up in the TTF, and we should think about it as more than just one funding mechanism. And that's why I'm here, because that's the stuff I care about and keeps me up at night.
No, absolutely. And that's a fantastic perspective, especially for this group. And so, you know, as mentioned, we kind of wanted to just talk about what we're talking about here, right? Because again, it's easy to just say like gas tax, roads, what are we doing? And I think it's really important that we start, you know, from the beginning. And so our transportation trust fund expires June 30th, 2024. And so what exactly does that mean? What's expiring? What are we reauthorizing, right? And so the way we need to think about this is in 2016, you know, we passed an 8-year program. And so now it's 2024 and that's reauthorizing. And so what exactly are we reauthorizing when we use that word? And so really what we're talking about is you're authorizing the spending, which is the $2 billion a year state capital plan. And then we have the borrowing, which for the 8-year period from 2016 to 2024 allowed us to take $12 billion in debt over that whole period. And then we're authorizing the schedule to pay off the debt. And so the actual money is for the debt service payments is put through the state annual appropriations process. But this is where we make sure that we're actually paying off the debt and hopefully not doing what we did for 20 plus years where we were not paying off debt. And so that's kind of where we are now. And then just moving along, the next thing that it's important to realize, right, is that the capital program is actually quite large. We have a $4.5 billion capital plan, and just over half of that is actually federal. And so that's where even before IIJA, this was a huge part of our capital plan. And we're here today, though, to speak specifically about the state program, because it's really important that we realize that federal funds only pay for certain things, and that what, kind of the crux of the issue we're here to talk about today, which is local aid, that's coming from the state. And so we need to make sure that while we have this federal program, it's very generous, that we're doing the right thing here at home to make sure that we are maximizing every single dollar that we can. And so just moving along here, just to give you a quick idea of how we break that up, right? This is kind of the breakdown of what's going into the Transportation Trust Fund. And so these are all the revenues that we collect from the state. They look generally the same year over year since 2016. And there's a lot to keep in mind that the last time that we did this, the reason that we did the right thing in 2016 was because we were forced to. So I just want to be very clear that, and we're going to get into some of the pitfalls and opportunities in the new authorization, but what happened was all of these funds that you see here were lower levels. And what happened was every single dime that the state was putting into the Transportation Trust Fund ended up going towards debt. And so Governor Christie's hands was kind of forced, and he shut down every state-funded transportation project in the state. And it was a really big deal for those of you that were around. It's a lot of projects. And then the legislature was forced to kind of negotiate and walk through it. And so we really need to be making sure that we're keeping an eye on this, that it's the correct mix of funds that are going towards the correct mix of uses. And I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen to talk a little bit more about the importance of where these funds go. And so this is just another quick breakdown of what we're really looking at here.
Yeah, so I think it's important to note. So if we look at where these funds go, so first off, we have a huge amount of funds going to New Jersey Transit. That would be amazing if we were investing in new transit options to the tune of $760 million every year. But a lot of that is on the operating side, and we need to make sure we're making bigger capital investments so that we can improve on those transit options, whether it's micromobility or any of those other pieces. Local aid is a huge piece of this. And that's not going anywhere, but I think we also need to start to think about what it is that we want to do with those. You know, Zoe talked a little bit about how federal projects are very prescriptive. I kind of think about the last reauthorization as if we had a flooded basement. The very first thing you have to do is you have to fix the flood, right? I've got to put in new French drains. I've got to fix the flood. But now that I've done that, my whole basement is ripped up. And before I start putting in everything that, just going back to what it looked like, I should really be thinking about what I want it to do. And so I think about this reauthorization as we fixed the flooding. We know how to, we've solved that problem for now. And so now is an opportunity to really look at what it is that we are doing with these dollars. What are we doing with our local aid dollars? Are we just fixing roads and creating new lanes? Or are we investing in multimodal transportation that helps all of our residents? And so I think that as we think about these things, we need to start to think about what our local aid projects look like, what our transportation options look like, what some of our state and our county roadways look like so that we can invest in better projects. And so is there a red line there too? I'm looking, there's NJDOT, NJ Transit, local aid. Is there another one?
Oh, no, I apologize. Okay. I forgot to delete the cell on the back end.
Oh, good. I thought I was missing one. So yeah, I think that when we think about our outputs, we need to think about what it is that we want to do differently this time around, how we want to think about our transportation networks and how we can meet our residents' goals. And going back to those 3 E's, how are we meeting those equity, those economic and those environmental goals in a better way with the dollars that we have to invest? Now is the time to sort of think big, because we know that there's huge changes coming down the pike, right? There's IIJA money. There is a real commitment to sustainable mobility, whether it's bike and walk lanes, whether it's EVs, with all of those pieces. There's opportunities. And when we're thinking about this reauthorization, we should be thinking about how we can better use these more flexible dollars and how many dollars we really need in there. Never less. I want to be very clear. It's never less dollars in this particular place.
Very much agreed. And so, I do want to build on that a little bit to say that, when we talk about IIJA, what happened was when they were messaging it, the federal government was using, and most people were using all these very large top line numbers. And there are 2 really important things to keep in mind is that federal funding generally comes in 2 tranches, right? Or 2 categories. The first being formula funds, which is what we've kind of always had. These are transit and DOT dollars that come down that are for very specific and prescriptive purposes. Bridge rehabilitation, state of good repair, things like this. And so IIJA did add a bunch of money to the existing federal funds, and they created a handful of small new ones that cover things like resilience that perhaps hadn't been looked at before. But then the other thing that this state money allows us to do is access the other part of the federal funding, which is grants, because a huge part of our federal IIJA money is actually in grant funding, and that generally requires at least a 20% state match. And so this pool of money that you see here illustrated, this breakdown for the state, is not just going towards directly fully funded state projects. This is also what enables us to leverage federal money. And I think we all know that if we can use $1 and bring home 9, that's a great setup. And so that's kind of part of the split here, is trying to think through, especially for the next few years where we still have these very large grant programs at the federal government. In addition to Kathleen's point, which is very important, what are we investing in project-wise in our state? And how are we thinking about mobility, right, is how are we using these funds to bring in more money? And then what are we using to directly invest on for ourselves that isn't covered by federal money, right? Because I think it's important, just to build on the other piece that Kathleen said, is that we need to be really thinking about this in terms of mobility and not quote unquote transportation. You can be surrounded by transportation assets, right? You can be in the middle of a bunch of highways next to an airport, but just because you have those doesn't mean you can actually get anywhere. There are many neighborhoods in the state that are incredibly car dependent. And if you do not own a car, it is very difficult to get anywhere else in the state, either walking or biking or on transit, right? And so how do we make sure that we're thinking about the holistic problem of mobility instead of just what are the physical capital program assets, right? Which is kind of the traditional way of looking at that. So that brings us to the $2 billion question, right? Where do we go from here? What are our options? And so the main piece of this, just kind of like functionally, is we can either do another, let's call it long-term reauthorization, which I think most would categorize as 4 years or more. Or do we go back to what we did do for, I think, 23 years prior to 2016, which is do a cycle of 1 or 2 year reauthorizations that don't actually improve the capital plan, don't really take a look back at how we're spending this money. They just kind of kick the can down the road and keep us skating along, right? And so it's important to note that, again, we had one of the lowest gas taxes in the country. And the gas tax is for New Jersey, and the petroleum gas receipts that's the bulk of how we're paying for this. That's going to change going forward. We have a lot of things that we really need to think about, but fundamentally right now, as we go into lame duck, as we get closer, what is it, like 8 months pretty much until the expiration, are we going to do a longer term plan and keep this solvent, or are we just going to go back? And so right now our gas tax is, I think, 42 cents and a little bit higher for diesel. And we do think that this is going to be a more traditional reauthorization. So while we need to think about time, we also need to think about exactly what we're reauthorizing and how we're doing that. And so this is going to be a really critical point, and it's one that I hope the counties are thinking about, because again, it's this state money that really gives communities the most flexibility to do what their towns and counties need. And so I'm going to keep it moving, and Kathleen's going to talk about some of the more philosophical questions about reauthorization.
Yeah, so I think that there's a bunch of moving parts to this. And so first and foremost, when you looked at Zoe's chart, the thing that always jumps out at me is over 75% of our funding comes from one place. And I think that from a government standpoint, when I look at our budget, that scares me. As you know, if somebody comes to me with a budget that is 75% reliant on one thing, it's not very hard for that thing to go wrong. And so one of the things that we do need to do is we need to think about how we diversify those pieces. And we need to have that conversation. 8 years ago, when I was talking about the reauthorization, we spent a lot of time talking about how many users of our roadways are not from New Jersey. And so that's an important piece when we start to think about what the new options are. Because somewhere between 25 and 30% of those petroleum and gas tax receipts are coming from people who are driving through our state. They are utilizing our roadways. And so the gas tax basically serves as a user fee. And we want to make sure that we are not overshifting to put more of that cost on our residents, because we know that people are using our roadways. And then we have what seems like the new hot topic to everybody. How are we getting EVs to pay into the system? Well, the funny thing is that I have been talking about how we get EVs to pay into the system for 15 years now. And when I started this conversation, the answer was, well, we don't need to worry about it. It's such a tiny piece, it doesn't matter. And 8 years ago, it was in an original draft of the bill, and then it was taken out because it was, oh, it's such a tiny piece. We don't need to worry about it. We'll worry about it later. It is a quickly growing piece. My inclination to tax EVs led to my current day job trying to get more people into EVs. And so I see every day how that piece of the population is growing. And if you look at the federal incentives, both the manufacturing incentives and the manufacturer's commitment to EVs, the fact of the matter is that we are going to have both electric and gas vehicles on our roadways. At some point, we may have hydrogen vehicles and some other vehicles. So we're going to need to talk about how we make sure that everybody is paying into the system because they are using our roads. And so I spend a lot of time, usually somewhere around midnight, looking up how other states make this work, because these are the things that keep me up at night. And so we should be talking. We talked again about how this is early to be talking about this. Well, first off, it's only 8 months away. But second, we should be talking about what we can learn from other states and what other things we should be looking at to diversify and to make sure that we get that right mix paying into the system. So there are things that other states do. There are registration fees that are dedicated to TTF, especially on the EV side. There are additional sales tax that are dedicated to the TTF. There are vehicle taxes. And something that will never work in New Jersey, and I'm in no way proposing it, but in other states, they pay a vehicle property tax that goes directly to the TTF. There are use fees. There are vehicle mile travels fees. There are gas taxes. There is discussion of kilowatt hour fees. But when we talk about those, we really do need to be talking about how do we make sure that we are not disproportionately charging our own residents for what others are driving on. So how do we shape those pieces? And I think for me, that conversation immediately goes to diversifying those pieces. And then there are other options. There are, business tax options. When we have big businesses coming into our state, when businesses are depending on transit or our roadways to get their workers to their offices, that's something that may make that investment worth it. And then there are, more innovative pieces where, there are places where you can leverage community fees that are specific to those communities' transportation needs. And so I think that there's a lot of different options on the table, and now is the time to sort of talk about all of them and figure out what makes sense for that right mix.
No, absolutely. And it's always tricky with New Jersey looking at other states because we very much have a culture where we feel that we are New Jersey and we are very special and all of those things won't work here, which is sometimes true, sometimes not. But as Kathleen kind of alluded to, other states don't have as big of a property tax issue. And so they can do different taxations. The kind of the full burden that New Jerseyans feel for taxes here reads a little bit different. And so it changes the sensitivities and how we think about it. But as mentioned, there are a lot of interesting ways to do this. Part of the problem in going forward, especially for this reauthorization, as I mentioned earlier, this is probably going to look a lot like a standard prior reauthorization, because we're kind of in this flux. We don't have enough EVs to switch completely to or alternative vehicles. Like we don't have enough of them yet to really switch over the model. It's tricky. It's a delta because we have to make sure that we're not doing anything to disincentivize the adoption of these new and cleaner vehicles.
So Zoe, I hope you don't mind me jumping in for a second, but I have a question. When you say the traditional reauthorization, do you mean, you're thinking it's going to be a 1-year reauthorization, a series of 1-year reauthorizations because we're not ready to yet come up with a formula to address the EV issue, or are you thinking it's going to be another 8-year reauthorization or a multi-year reauthorization?
That is a really hard question. So what I was referencing just now is meaning for what the pay-fors will look like, what the money going in will look like. But to answer your question, I wish I had a crystal ball. I
Right.
think that I was joking recently that if you were going to make like a meme or a cartoon of the situation right now, it would be, Bugs Bunny with all the Elmer Fudd guns in his face, like, do it now. This is the time to do it. But there are a lot of tricky factors that go into what we can get done legislatively, and what the legislature's appetite is, what the state's appetite is. And the other thing this actually is a really brings up a really good point, is that, as mentioned, in 2016, every single cent that the state was collecting for transportation was going to debt. And so our hand was forced, and we are not going to have that this time. The biggest trigger right now in this is that the way the gas tax was set up is there was a true up clause. So instead of being, let's say, pegged to inflation, where it would go up every year, the gas tax has been fluctuating to make sure that we're covering the needs of our set capital plan cap. And so that mechanism expires in the new in the new year, or the new fiscal year. And so that puts us in a precarious position. I forget the percent off the top of my head, but if I remember correctly, the legislation said that once that does expire, it reverts to, I think it was 11 or 11.5% of the current price of gas. And so what that does is it creates a really unstable number going in, and it makes it very hard to plan, right? Because as people on this call probably are aware, we do multi-year transportation planning. And so you have to be able to identify long-term sources because we know most projects take more than a year. And so when we have question mark amount of money coming in, that can be destabilizing. And so I think no matter what, we have to do something. And I think, John, I wish I could answer that question. I want to say that we're going to do a 4 or 8 year reauthorization. I think it's the right thing to do, and I think it would be fantastic. But I think we're going to have to see, because we have a big election coming up. We have, again, a multitude of different factors we need to be considering going into this. And I think it's going to play out. But I will make a plug that anyone on this call that wants to express their interest in seeing a longer term healthy reauthorization, I strongly suggest you talk to your local officials, because I think having a groundswell of interest from local and county officials is really important in pushing this forward.
And Zoe, can I jump in here? Because I think one of the things that when we talk about sort of the traditional one versus whatever this new model is going to be, when we talk about the new model, you're right. So EVs are still making up a small percentage, but that percentage is going to grow. So one of the things that we need to talk about when we talk about what that new model looks like is we need to, I think there's an intrinsic desire to go to the easiest piece, which is, well, how much is the hole they're creating today? If I have 123,000 EVs on the road, how much should they pay in? And so we'll get that number and then we'll be fine. And that doesn't solve the long-term problem, because it plugs a hole that is today's hole. But if you don't actually fix the hole, it just grows. And so we need to be looking at a diversity of funding mechanisms that start to balance each other, so that if those gas tax revenues go down, at the same time, those EV revenues should be going up, because we should have created a stable source for that, not just created a $200 million plug. And so I think that that's important to think about as we talk to folks, because, and we don't have solutions. I just gave you a laundry list of solutions to pick from, but that needs to be part of the conversation, is that we are trying to create a long-term solution that allows the transition to happen in whatever time frame it happens, but we still have the funding available, because we've thought about this, and we've thought about how to make those those pushes and pulls occur. And also that trigger that you talked about that raises the gas tax every year, there is going to be a point, if we do EV adoption right, if we do it towards those goals, there is a point where only people who can't afford EVs are the ones that are driving those gas powered vehicles. And we don't want the gas tax to go up to a punishingly high rate, because of that. So we need those EV revenues or those other revenues to be part of the calculus about how we change the gas tax.
Yeah, and I think an important point here is that the gas tax is unfortunately very convenient, right?
Right.
It nets our out-of-state people. As you guys know, New Jersey is a huge pass-through state. We get a large, disproportionately compared to other states, amount of our transportation funding from out-of-state people. And that's a good thing, as we kind of talked about. But a lot of the mechanisms that people are discussing, whether it's a vehicle miles travel tax or kilowatt hour charges, they don't net the same revenue out of state. And we do definitely want to make sure that we have, especially out of state trucks, given the new freight and goods movement uptick. We want to make sure that these entities are all paying in, because to bring it back to the 3 E's that Kathleen mentioned, our transportation funding intake needs to also be considerate of our other state goals, right? Equity amongst them, absolutely, right? And that's what we're talking about. We don't have a situation yet where you can get a $5,000, you can't get many used cars for $5,000 anymore, but let alone an EV, right? So if we are allowing the gas tax to stay the main mechanism for too long into this transition, it gets very inequitable very quickly. And then the second piece is the environmental goals. We need to make sure that we're thinking about our funding mechanisms as another tool to help incentivize the environmental outcomes that we want to see. For example, one thing that I thought was very interesting is, if you're not familiar, the national the Association of State Legislatures is a really good resource for looking at what other people are doing. And they did an interesting analysis. It's a few years old now, but still very interesting, of how people do registrations, vehicle registrations. And there are a few states that have interesting models that, where New Jersey, we largely factor in the weight of the vehicle and the class of the vehicle. Other states factor in both. It's like a nexus between fuel efficiency and age. So if you are buying a cheap used car that is inefficient, it's a very different rate than if you are buying a brand new Hummer that is mostly gas, right? And so thinking about these mechanisms and how they play out is going to be important, because again, the gas tax was so clean and easy, and we're like, here it is, this is what we do. We're not going to have that. And to Kathleen's point, part of that's good. We need to have a broader source of funding so that we're not destabilized. But we are going to, politically, it's easier to have one thing that you're doing, and we're not doing that. This time we'll have a lot of gas tax, maybe a portion of sales tax. It'll be interesting to see what really comes to the fore. But again, we need to use this opportunity to lay down, let's call it little tracks to go towards the future, because working through a plan that will hit when we're in the middle of the transition is going to be difficult.
Yeah.
I have another question.
Please.
And I should know this, but there is not currently a tax on the use of EV vehicles in New Jersey. Is there a kilowatt
So no,
okay.
there is not. And I actually think that that's an important point, because one of the things with the EV transition is that it's about behavior. So the thing I love about sort of the whole EV transition, it goes back to my traffic safety roots, which is changing driver behavior. And there's some really cool driver behaviors that start to change, because I think all of us have experienced that moment when we're on empty and we pull into our driveway and go, I'll just get gas in the morning. And then we get up late, the dog needs to go out, and you go, I don't have gas in my car. With EVs, that's not an issue. That, because you're charging at home. 80% of that charging happens at home. But we need that that charging needs to happen in a managed way, which reduces everybody's energy costs in their homes. But also we need to find a way to capture some of that use fee, right? So that goes back to that sort of balance between, some sort of sales registration fee as well as a use fee, and doing a mix of those things, because not everyone is going to have, a lot of people right now plug in their car with a regular plug. Nobody knows that it's an EV charger.
Right.
If you use a level 2 charger, we have a better chance of knowing, but we don't know right now. And so we need, and if we charge too much on a per kilowatt hour fee, nobody's going to buy the more expensive charger so they can get charged more money. Like that's never going to work. But also, we have public charging. And that public charging is where all of those out of state residents are coming from. And so that needs a different fee. So even if we're thinking about how we collect money from EVs, those are different revenue sources depending on the use and depending on who's paying it. And so we need to think about that differently as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess go ahead, John. Go ahead.
Just a real quick, you might have mentioned this coming through. So I guess one of the big concerns or one of the big problems that we're going to have moving forward in that transition as we move closer to 2035, right, where everything's supposed to be, right? Who's going to pay for the infrastructure? Like you know what I mean? Like we're sitting here, we're saying, hey, we want to be mandated, we want to have electric vehicles, and we want to do all this and do all that. Well, who's going to pay for all that? How are we going to get the revenue, right, stream up to pay for that infrastructure going forward? If the EV, you know what I mean? Like if we're not charging, to your point, Zoe, like thinking about the future, right, and thinking about how do we get to that? And just another one of our great unfunded mandates, right, that was so famously known for, is going to be a serious burden, I believe, on the municipalities and the counties.
So are you talking road infrastructure or utility infrastructure?
Utility infrastructure to hold up the actual, like for right now, we're going to put UV chargers. We don't just put a UV charger there and on the corner and plug it into an electrical, like all of that infrastructure work that's involved in that and putting all those chargers in and getting all that stuff up and running. Who pays for all that?
So that goes to, and I am here representing. I'm here representing myself as a Mercer County Commissioner, but that goes to my day job, and there are ratepayer implications to that, and there are programs that are created to create that mechanism for it. But right now, that's not a municipal or a county piece unless it's the municipality or the county who's paying into it. Same as the fundamental utility infrastructure build is the same as if you were building a building right now. So you decide you're building a building, you're the one who's paying for that utility infrastructure to go in, right? Like, but that's the way that works today. So it's a little bit different from TTF infrastructure, but I do think in the long run, what we need to do is we need to be able to know from a TTF perspective where that EV infrastructure is, so that we can start to collect whatever that use fee, use tax is on those things, and it's going to have to be twofold, actually threefold. You're going to have the public side. So that's going to get you your out of state residents and probably some of your super users, right? Because if I drive a lot, I can charge up at home, but then I'm going to have to charge up on the road too, because I drive 50,000 miles a year. And then you have fleets, and then you have residents. And so we are going to have to diversify how we collect that use piece if we go with a kilowatt hour something, because we have to think about those different users.
I'd like to hop in also to say that right now, it's mostly federal funds that are paying for this. This is right now, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Kathleen, I don't think municipalities are paying for the physical charging units, even that are given to them, right? And the other thing that I would say is, we have to look at this. When gas cars were first introduced, they were so novel. It was this huge new thing, and there was a really big incentive. So a market incentive, basically. So gas stations popped up because it was a good way to make money, and that's capitalism, right? And so where we need to look at this is the development of that infrastructure right now is being led by federal funds because they need to make this mode and this option viable. But going forward, we're already seeing companies like Wawa and the traditional gas stations, they want to have this part of the market because what doesn't happen? I can't charge my car in 10 minutes. Even with a fast DC charger, you're talking about, and I can't speak to Tesla, I'm not sure about theirs, but generally you're at least 20 minutes in the location where you are. And so
Yeah.
that's actually more than you would do, for any sort of gas setup. And so that's where it's kind of been interesting to see some of this federally funded infrastructure has also been creating interesting partnerships with the government entity that's trying to site it and the local businesses that are like, yes, please put this in my parking lot so that these people will come in and eat my pizza while their car is charging. And so I do definitely expect the private market to take up a lot of that work.
Thank you, Zoe. And I think just to expand a little bit on John's concern, that I believe is the concern of our county engineers long term, is the impact of the EVs on the local roads and the bridges, given that EVs weigh 3, 4, whatever it is, the amount more than the typical internal combustion engine, and the fact that we're not collecting any type of fee to maintain the roads on EVs is a huge challenge. And I think that this time around, we've got to figure out how to address that and to account for that.
No, we absolutely do. I'm not joking when I said I started having this conversation 15 years ago, and we still don't have a plan, right? And now we've gotten to that point where, at 15 years ago it was a ways away, and it didn't really matter. And now we're at that point where it gets to a tipping point, and you don't want to. Again, I focus on driver behaviors, and you don't want to get to a point where drivers are used to not paying into this, and then there's so many of them that they push back, right? Because then we get to a different point, and then it's harder. And so we need to have a solution now for that small hole, so that as it grows, that solution grows with it. And it is really important. And I will say this too, in my perfect world, part of the way we solve for EVs being heavier and the additional strain on our roadways is we create more sustainable transportation networks, and we get people out of their cars. That's to me, in my perfect world, we do a lot more of pedestrian, bike, micro mobility options, so that we don't have the EVs driving on our roads as much as they are today, and we actually reduce the vehicle miles traveled in personal vehicles. That's my perfect solution. It's really hard to come by. But we also see the impacts that it has. It makes our residents healthier. It helps our local businesses. It does all of these great things. And so when I talk about how we want to think differently about our reauthorization and sort of where our priorities go, that's part of it. Many of our counties have complete streets ordinances, and we say that we care about it, but we don't then build on those pieces. We don't then say, okay, well, we're going to use some of this TTF money to build that bike lane. It's an app like, well, the TTF money is going to build the road, and then we've got to go after this other piece to build a bike lane. If we did them together, we would be utilizing our dollars better. We would be reducing the load on those roads because we would have other users. And so, that's some of the stuff we need to think about. But that is, again, it's my perfect world, and I don't live in that world. So it's about planning to get there.
Yeah. And that is part of this thought as we go into the reauthorization, right? Because if we reauthorize to have the exact same capital plan that we've kind of been having, we're going to keep a state of good repair. We're going to keep chugging along, right? But if we think about this a little bit differently, at both the state option and the county and local option, imagine a time where most of your driving is done on the long stretches on like the corridors, right? But then once you get to an area, you can get on a little, like if folks have traveled and you've gone on like a bus rapid transit situation, they're incredibly easy to use. They're very friendly, and they're really good for like local trips and downtowns, right? So you can get to an area. I live in Monmouth County, kind of in the shore area. So maybe you drive to near Asbury Park if you're coming from a non-beach area. But then you have local options, whether it be biking, walking, electric scooters, or a BRT system to kind of move you around locally. That would be really good for business, and it would be good for the environment and our roads. And so again, as Kathleen said, it's kind of it's what we would love to work towards in a longer view, but it's something that if we don't make intentional decisions now, we won't get there, right?
Yeah.
So.
And I think I'll just give one more example because it's near and dear to my heart. So there's a brand new project in Trenton called Go Trenton. They are electrified vehicles. They're basically like big golf carts, and it is $2 for a ride essentially anywhere in downtown Trenton. And this is and it does three really. It hits all three of my E's, right? And this is a great example of what Zoe's talking about. It creates equitable transportation. You know, people are paying $10, $15, $20 to take an Uber from downtown Trenton where they live to a grocery store. Now they have different options. They have $2 option to get where they need to go. It has awesome opportunities for local businesses because it gets state workers, instead of going, oh, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to drive 5 minutes, look for parking for 10, and then go to this restaurant. I can now text the Go Trenton and use that $2 just to get me there. And it has great environmental impacts too, because they're electrified vehicles in downtown Trenton where we have an overabundance of emissions. So those are the sorts of things, if we think flexibly about it, that we should be able to do. And it's a very concrete one because it's there today.
Great, thank you, Zoe and Kathleen. Do we have any questions from our audience? I know we've got some county engineers, some commissioners, administrators, county officials from across the state. Any questions? All right. If not, this is great. I think this might be the first formal conversation about the reauthorization of the Transportation Trust Fund. So hopefully this will kick things off, and we'll have a really productive discussion over the next couple of months. And President Young has a question.
Just a statement, actually, Johnny. So me and John we've talked about how we're going to, as NJAC, are going to kind of attack the Transportation Trust Fund, right? So everyone on the call, we're going to ask for I think we're going to put together a little committee and maybe start to work on some solutions and some ways to go. So if anyone on the call is interested, call Donadio and let him know your name, and then we'll figure it out from there. But we are going to try to put something together, just so you know, so it's not just John trying to tackle this as one. We're going to try to put together something to really make sure that the counties have a true voice at the table to tackle this issue this upcoming year. That was it, sir.
Well, we do have a question. My number is in the white pages in the old telephone book, so you can find it there. Let me see if no, you all know how to find me. So I have two questions here, if you don't mind, and one from John Parrott. Is the goal to maintain the same level of funding, $430 million for local aid, or request additional funding?
I have to be honest, I think that's an ANJAC question, because as I mentioned, I would love to see more transportation funding. But I have to be honest, right now, my biggest concern is making sure that we do the reauthorization, period. And I think that we would all want more robust funding. For what it's worth, over the past 10 years, local aid has been the largest growing pot out of the three kind of buckets that we put our funding in. And I think that there's a case to be made. I think that counties and local governments have gotten pretty good at spending it down, right? Because that was a problem for a little while, but I think we're in a really good position now. So I think where ANJAC wants to follow, not ANJAC, sorry, the Association of Counties wants to follow up on what your platform is. I don't think it would be the worst to ask for more.
Yeah, listen, we're going to ask for more. I mean, and I think we're gonna, that's part of the reason why we're going to form a committee and kind of justify the need and justify the ask. We just don't want to go out there and say, look, we want more money. I think that's why, in part, we were successful last time around in increasing the local aid allocations, because we were able to quantify the need and the inventory at the local level. We're going to do that again this time. The real challenge that I have, that I'm concerned about with respect to the local aid piece this time around, is that we don't have legislative champions in Steve Sweeney and Steve Oraho in the legislature that we did this time around. So we're going to do our due diligence and we're going to hopefully find that, legislative champion, but they were key players last time, particularly on the local aid piece. So I think that's the thing that's keeping me up, at night, about this and the reauthorization of the local aid on the local aid piece of it. So
at least the one thing I would say that I hope that you all rest assured that it won't go down.
Yeah.
I have zero inclination. I have not heard anything that says that it would change downwardly. I think that would be politically very difficult to do. But I think it's a really good idea for you guys to have a committee and have a voice in this process, because again, your infrastructure, the county and local infrastructure, is a huge part of what we as drivers and riders interact with, right? It's a very different experience on your local roads than it is, driving down a state highway. So.
Right. We have one more. This is a comment from Sunny in Mercer County. Mercer County is at the forefront of building a bike lane along with roads. When or where? Sunny, you got to help me out here. When or where are we? ROW.
Right of way.
Right. Sorry about that, Sunny. I love you.
He's not wrong. We're doing a lot of good things in Mercer County. That doesn't mean we're doing all the right things. And I think that there's always room for improvement and ways that we can do those pieces better. I know I and Lawrence spent a lot of time, and I always encourage this. Bike lanes are great. We need to move them from recreational to really being within the roadways and making them actual transportation options. Recreational bikeways are great. But we also need them to be able to move people. And so he's right. We do have a lot of them in Mercer County, but I think that if we had a larger investment in the state, we could do more faster, and it would help get our residents around in better ways.
Sunny's always right. So I'm glad that he made a comment, and I appreciate it, Sunny. And again, thank you, Mr. President, for being here today. I appreciate it. And thank you, Zoe and Kathleen, as well. We'll make sure to make the PowerPoint presentation available and this recording on our website. And we will send some information out about forming an NJAC committee to address the reauthorization of the Transportation Trust Fund. So stay tuned for additional details. And thanks again, everybody. Have a great day.